welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Maddie. I am a registered nurse. I work in the PACU and I have previous experience in the cardiac ICU. If you can tell by today's title, this is more of a serious topic that I've been wanting to cover for a while. However, I wanted to make sure I did my research first. The topic of today is how to protect your nursing license. I first want to put out this disclaimer that none of this is legal advice, but these are tips and tricks that I've accumulated from other people who do work in the legal system, who have shared some of their best information and tips. But these are some things that I wish that I knew that I'd learned in school. Unfortunately, they don't teach this in nursing school. They are things that I've had to learn along the way, learn from the mistakes that I've seen other people. And as we all know, we've had that recent infamous incident where the nurse Redonda Vaught in a Tennessee hospital had criminal charges against her. So I will be sharing a few examples from that incident as well. So if I piqued your interest, then I hope you'll stay tuned as we get ready to talk about your license and how to protect it. So let's first talk about setting boundaries for yourself. The best time to learn how to do this is when you are a new graduate nurse on the floor, but it can also be the most intimidating time to implement these strategies. Oftentimes when you start in a new unit, there might be more experienced people. You'll definitely have a preceptor, and it's possible that the way that they do things are not always necessarily the right way of doing things, and you might learn the hard way. There are sometimes unsafe staffing areas. The hospital is not always going to have your back that you're working at, so these are just some strategies to start implementing very early on to protect your license. First, I want to start out with two things that I do personally that are my own personal boundaries that I've set up. The first thing that I don't do as a registered nurse is I do not pass medications for other nurses except for on a few rare occasions. Examples of this would be if somebody has to use the restroom, or a different unit that I'm floated to needs assistance with their patients and just patient care, and somebody asks me in passing, hey, do you care to finish passing my medications on this patient? Obviously, this is something that makes me hesitate, and I usually will say no to, again, except for a few instances, because one, I have not received report on the patient, so I don't know anything about them. I don't know if they're getting ready to have surgery the next day. Perhaps they have a blood thinner on their chart that they are to receive, and in this case, I would need to get an order from the physician to hold it due to surgery. It's possible that their medications have interactions, or it's even possible that the patient has an allergy that I am unaware of. If I don't have access to the patient's chart and I have not received a report from them so that I am accepting care and then have access to the chart, I typically refuse to pass medication, especially if someone's in the middle and they say, hey, do you care to finish this for me so I can go run to the restroom? That's a big no-no for me. So if this happens to you, just very politely deny the request, explain why, and just know that you're protecting your own license in this instance. Now, the few rare examples in which I will pass medications for a patient that is not my own is if we are in a coding situation or we are doing a rapid intubation, and even then I'm going over all the medication rights, especially for intubation, with another nurse or with a provider such as the anesthesiologist at bedside. This is when stating out loud the dose, the patient, the route of the type of medication helps. If you state it out loud, other people to catch you, or for the provider to interject and say, no, that is not what I wanted, or no, that is not for this patient, or no, that is not the correct dose or medication. Another instance might be if somebody has a patient who is on multiple drips and they need assistance with that patient. In this case, when I used to help friends receive open heart recoveries or vice versa, a lot of times you have to rely on your team to help you get the patient settled. And even in this case, I'm always going back to double check the medications, but my friend would usually be the one receiving report, and as the patient came in, I would be the one making sure all the medications hanging were the right meds, at the right rates, at the right dose, and right route. The last example would be if I am taking report for another nurse while they're going to lunch, I just want to make sure that I have a full report first. and know the patient's background and details and ask my questions up front. All right, now moving on to the second thing that I personally do as a registered nurse in setting a boundary for myself is that if I am not comfortable with a certain skill or task, I speak up and I refuse to do it as long as it's not considered neglect for the patient. So this might be, for example, a skill that I've never been trained in, or perhaps a skill that I've not received training in for a while. For example, for me, this would be something like CRT, which is continuous renal replacement therapy. So if I had a patient who is on CRT, I would have to, first I would go to the charge nurse and explain the issue and then take it up further if needed, but we would work to find a nurse who was recently certified in CRT to take care of that patient, because in that case the assignment is not appropriate due to my lack of training. So hopefully that's kind of painting a picture already of things that you can set boundaries for yourself on that are appropriate. Now, something that I learned about recently is that your state may have certain laws with regards to staffing. So as we all know, safe staffing is becoming a growing issue these days. More and more nurses are speaking up about it. However, there are some states in which if you go to work and you believe that your staffing assignment is unsafe, you are technically legally not allowed to refuse it because it may be considered abandonment or neglect of your patient. The best option in this case, according to legal experts, is to create some kind of paper trail. So if you are unhappy with your assignment and are not able to get it changed, you go ahead and accept that assignment and you document like crazy. But then you also make sure that you send some sort of notification to your charge nurse, your manager, and go up to the chain of command and make sure you have copies of all of the documents and the emails that you send. This way, if something comes back later and there's an incident related to unsafe staffing, you show that you did your part to bring this to their attention, to document well despite that you haven't refused and you haven't done something illegal by abandoning your patient. Okay, now that we've talked about how to set up boundaries for yourself, let's talk about insurance and whether or not this is useful. There's a lot of debate out there on whether or not nurses should have insurance, and there are a couple myths, such as if you have insurance as a nurse, you actually become more of a target. This is a complete myth. There's no way for them to know whether or not you have insurance, and there's nothing wrong with having insurance. It does not make you a greater target. So if somebody is telling you this, just know that it is a complete myth. Whether or not insurance is something worth purchasing for you, this is something that I would seek legal consultation for and talk to your family about. There are a lot of benefits to it, specifically because your hospital may tell you when you accept a job that they give you coverage, but they may not be transparent on what kind of coverage you're getting. So prime example of why you want to check out what kind of insurance you're getting and knowing what you're getting is the Redonda example. So Redonda had to go to 2 different hearings, and I will have links to resources down below that cover this a little bit more in depth, but my understanding is she had to be defended in front of the State Board of Nursing, as well as be defended in front of a criminal hearing. So in that case, she used the same attorney for both, when really she should have had 2 separate attorneys because they were 2 separate specialties, if that makes sense. In this case, you want to make sure your insurance/attorney is specialized and you know what you want coverage for. So you want to look for in your insurance is that you have professional defense coverage. This would be if you are in front of the State Board of Nursing, criminal defense coverage, and a civil court coverage. And again, this is not legal advice, so this is my best interpretation of what I would be looking for if I were purchasing insurance. I have a link for this as well, but NSO is one of the most reliable resources for insurance and one of the most well-liked by nurses. So that would be one that I would point you guys to if you want to get an idea of what to look for. Moving on to charting tips. This is something that I wish I had known earlier, but have definitely began to implement in my current career. The primary tip that I want to give you guys is to just be careful of the statements that you make in your documentation. An example of this, these are 2 very common statements that are made in documentation that I even saw my preceptors type in. And the first one is patient resting with eyes closed. Now, this can be an issue because there are instances in which a nurse documented patient resting with eyes closed, and when shift change came, the patient was actually found dead. So in this case, you want to change your documentation to something that shows more proof. For example, upon patient assessment, respirations, even and unlabored, that shows a sign of life, for example, even if their eyes are closed. Or patient does not show any signs of distress upon examination, please see vital signs for further details. So not only are you showing that you've assessed them, that there's no signs of perhaps them having a heart attack or labored breathing, you've also pointed them to vital signs. So I definitely would recommend charting, like pointing people to other aspects of the chart just as a reminder, and also so you don't have to double chart and perhaps make a mistake in typing out all the vitals. I'm not going to retype the respirations, the heart rate, and like the blood pressure at that time. You can just point to the time in the documentation that matches the time of your assessment so that they can see the patient had vital signs at that time that were stable. Another common documentation that people make is "will continue to monitor," but I've come to learn that this is technically documenting in a future tense. So you are owning responsibility of future monitoring of the patient, even if your shift has changed. So a better way to document, like a better substitution for this type of documentation would be "plan of care ongoing," or "no new orders at this time," "patient does not express any concerns at this time," and so on. Another thing that you guys want to avoid doing, just like I stated previously, is avoid charting in advance time, because again, you might not be able to own for that, but it also shows that you weren't there and present in that time in case something different transpires. So always document in real time, and if you're documenting in past, just make sure you've written down somewhere what time it was. Again, you can link things back to when a phone call was made, when an order was placed, or when a medication was administered, because a lot of times those have timestamps in the documentation. So if you chart like "see MAR" for details or "see vital signs" for details, that's again kind of helping correlate the timestamp from those occurrences to your documentation if it was, for example, 15 minutes ago. And then last but not least, something every nurse should be doing is when you hand over a report or take report, you should always get the full name of the nurse and what their specialty is or what their department is, if possible. This is especially important if you work in the emergency department, that if you're receiving a patient from the field, from transportation, from a first responder, you get the person's name so that you don't have to go digging for it later. You get the department, and you get basically their specialty, if they were an EMT, if they were another RN, etc. Alright guys, and that is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm really enjoying doing these types of videos to just help nurses in general, especially new grad nurses. If you have your own tip, leave it below, because again, I want to make it a safe place for people to share their experiences. We want to help our new grad babies out as well, and our nursing students just perform the best so we can all be better nurses. So again, if you have something to comment, please leave it down below. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I will see you all later. Tutunana.